Great. All right, well, let me just give you a summary of the session first, and then I'll talk about specific DV issues. So this was a 30-day session, which means it was a budget session unless the governor wanted to put some legislation on and give it a message. So there were some crime bills and other pieces of legislation that were important that she gave messages to. But of course, the gist of it was the budget. And the legislature actually passed the largest budget in the history of New Mexico. And we have done that before, where we passed the largest budget and then a couple of years later had a big financial crisis and had to lower the budget. But this time, hopefully we'll be able to maintain this level for a while. And the total budget for the state, not including any federal dollars, is $8.5 billion. And that is over $1 billion more than the budget in the current fiscal year. And that is largely attributable to the gas and oil prices. Of course, a barrel of oil is about $92 right now, and it keeps fluctuating mostly up. And of course, with the crisis in the world, it may go up even more, which is not good for us personally, but is really good for state revenues, because we get millions of dollars for every dollar that the price of oil increases. So we have this big budget, and a lot of good things were included in the budget. The legislature introduced 505 pieces of legislation, and that includes memorials and quite a few bills that never actually got heard because they weren't germane. They didn't have a governor's message, and they didn't have to do with money. There were 250 House bills, 255 Senate bills, and of all those bills, 64 bills actually passed. And one of those bills was House Bill 2, the big budget bill, and another one was House Bill 1, which is the bill that funds the legislature, the legislative council service, and pays for all the per diem of the legislators. Because of course, we so value our legislators that we are the only state left in the country that does not pay our legislators one dime for their service. They get a per diem when they're in Santa Fe working during the 30 or 60-day sessions, and then they get a per diem when they do interim committee work. So that's something that many people think we need to change, but it hasn't happened yet. Okay. One of the things that we hear a lot about is the education department and the need for more money. This budget did increase the education budget by $425 million, and it increased the Medicaid budget, which some of our clients receive Medicaid, by about $400 million. So those are positive things that were included in the budget. Now, for domestic violence, it was, and it should have been a good year. So we did interim committee presentations. We talked about everything that was needed in a broad sense to the Health and Human Services Interim Committee. So when the budget was proposed in the beginning of the session, there's a governor's budget, and you've probably heard me talk about this before. There's a legislative finance committee budget, and then the House Appropriations Committee starts talking about the budgets, and they pick one or the other to put in the budget into the big House Bill 2 bill. So we really liked the governor's budget because it was going to increase domestic violence funding by $7.2 million. And the LFC budget increased it by $4 million. So we like the governor's budget obviously better, but usually the way the House Appropriations Committee works is they pick the lower budget. So of course they picked the LFC budget that had the $4 million for expansion of domestic violence. And $1 million of that $4 million was to be appropriated from the Early Childhood Fund, contingent upon a bill passing that would have allowed them to appropriate, would have allowed the legislature to take money out of that fund that wasn't necessarily for early childhood programs. So we knew right off that was going to be a problem, and we were going to lose that $1 million because that bill was not going to pass. And it did actually get withdrawn by the sponsor because the governor said, don't bother to do this bill because I'm going to veto it because we don't want other uses of the Early Childhood Trust Fund. So that may require some negotiation in the future. But so that put our $1 million that was hanging out there in jeopardy. So once it passed out of the House with $3 million in the budget, and knowing that that $1 million was going to be a problem, we started working on the Senate Finance Committee, and I know we sent out alerts to you all. And so what ultimately happened is they replaced that $1 million with $500,000 of recurring money and $500,000 of non-recurring money. So that means in the recurring money category for general domestic violence services, we have $3.5 million, and we have another $500,000 out there, which I think we can make recurring, that the department will help make that recurring in the next year's budget. So I feel like the $4 million is pretty solid. Now, in addition to that, we had again this year that junior bill. We call it House Bill 2 Junior, but it's always a different number. And this one started in the Senate and was Senate Bill 48. So the House and the Senate each got $25 million. So 25 goes to the House that has 70 members. 25 million went to the Senate, which has 42 members. And then of that 25 million, it was split in half. So half was recurring money and half was non-recurring money. So just to make it as confusing as possible, this is how they were doing it. So every legislator got a pot of junior money. The senators got 600,000, half recurring, half non-recurring. The House members got approximately 187,000, half recurring, half non-recurring. And so they got to decide with some restrictions what they could appropriate that money for, what they could put in their list. And there, I sent it to all our members, the actual House Appropriation Substitute for Senate Bill 48, which has all of the appropriations by category of non-recurring, recurring. But we received, by you asking your legislators and by me asking certain legislators to fund the coordinated community response system, we got a total of another approximately 1.5 million. And here's how that's broken down. So in the recurring categories, and you all got this in the report I sent out, 390,000 to CYFD recurring money to help get some coordinated community response teams going. I mean, that would enable you all to hire a person that could begin to coordinate that sort of thing. And I'm assuming that CYFD will be RFPing that to communities. I don't know. I'm sure there'll be conversations with CYFD about that money, but that money is supposed to be recurring. And then there were a number of shelters that got a total of $470,000 in recurring money. And then other shelters that got $415,000 of non-recurring money. Then Las Cruces, they wanted money to go to the city of Las Cruces so that an assessment could be made of the needs and the type of facilities needed for the program in Las Cruces. So that was $230,000 for that. So that's basically the summary of what was happening as far as the money, the junior money and House Bill 2. And then we were tracking a number of pieces of legislation. We were tracking that rebuttable presumption bill for being able to hold people who had committed violent crimes. There would be the assumption that they should be held unless their attorney could prove they shouldn't be. And that was a very controversial bill, and it ultimately died. It was not specific to domestic violence in any way, but we wanted to track that to just track it to see what was happening. There were actually two of those pieces of similar legislation, and both of those died. There was a bill, we tried to track some of the relevant crime bills. There was an increased penalty for a felon possessing a firearm. There was a bill for, which wasn't germane, sexual misconduct policies in schools and colleges. A bill for stiffer sentences for having a firearm, and a bill that we were supporting, even though it didn't include the language, the exact language that we wanted, that tenant rights and ownership requirements for lease termination. And Senator Cedillo Lopez has introduced for us at least once the ability for survivors of domestic violence to be able to get out of a lease if there's a situation where they need to leave. Now, this tenant bill, which was House Bill 65, didn't have that, but it has some other protections that were relevant. But it doesn't matter because ultimately it did not pass. It passed out of the House and died in the infamous Senate Judiciary Committee. So that was the end of that one. I'm looking through my list here. One bill, so because there are all these smaller crime bills, they all got rolled into the Senate into one big crime bill, which was then passed, but it didn't have some of the more controversial things in it. And that is something that the governor really wanted, were the ability to address some of the problems, particularly in Albuquerque. Now, another bill which we have been tracking and has been introduced before, and it is of concern to us, and that's the one where indigent people who have been fined or have to pay court fees for their proceedings, there's been an effort for several years to eliminate that fee for them, that indigent people should not have to pay court fees. And I think that philosophically, we would all pretty much agree with that. The problem is, for domestic violence specifically, you get some of those fees and use them for the offender treatment programs. So we don't oppose those bills, but we want to make sure that if those funds go away, and they have been decreasing, that the legislature will replace those with general fund money. And that bill passed the House. It was House Bill 81, but it died in the Senate. That will be back. It's been introduced now for several years. It's probably ethically and morally the right thing to do. And we would never oppose that, but we have to make sure that that your programs are adequately funded. Another bill that Representative Chasey has been introducing for several years and finally got through this year was the creation of a violence intervention program, where there would be $10 million, and that money was in the budget, to allow entities to apply for that money. And I think depending on the exact language of what's allowed, that it might be money that's accessible to you all for specifically trying to create solutions in violent crime situations. Another important bill which we tracked, just because this has been of big interest to us, was the Senate Bill 12, Missing Indigenous Persons. And this bill amends that Missing Persons Act that we all have supported, and we actually got amended last year to specifically say, you're a missing person, you do not want to be found by the person who has been abusing you, that it is a requirement that your name and location not be revealed to anyone, that you get to decide who you want to know. So we watched that to make sure there's no changes with that. But this was all about Indigenous missing persons, and the fact that there are so many, particularly missing Indigenous women, and there's been so little follow-up by law enforcement on those. And this bill really brought that to attention, created a specific position within the Attorney General's office and funded that position. That bill did pass and is on the way to the governor. That pretty much sums up the legislation that was introduced, that we followed, tracked, or worked on. We did have several bills introduced by our champions in the legislature to expand funding for domestic violence, but those were just those vehicle bills that we use to talk about and do presentations if they come up in a hearing. Just that money, if we're ever going to get it, has to be rolled into the budget. So thoughts, questions? Oh, I also sent you the capital outlay list, because I know some of you talk to your legislators about expanding, about getting money for capital outlay for your buildings. And so that list I sent by county, so you can look it up by your county and see if your legislators really came through. Questions? Comments?
Hi, everyone. I want to brag on Linda a little bit. When Senator Rodriguez called me to talk about what she, provided in reoccurring funds for us, at the end of the call, she spoke about Linda's skills and how well she represents us and how much she appreciates Linda. So I told her I completely agree. And I know Linda will probably say that it's a team effort, and I know it is, but also I just want to appreciate you. You've been such a steadfast lobbyist for all of us and a real champion of the cause. And the legislators notice it as well.
Thank you. Nancy is a great champion. Senator Rodriguez is a great champion for all domestic violence
She
programs.
is. She is.
Linda, I have a question. We talked a little bit about this before, but we just want to make sure that behavioral health, CYFD, is really clear about how much money sum total is going to domestic violence, so it doesn't kind of get, blended in with other things. And just wanting to make sure that, I know you sent me all the proof with the junior bill money and as for the other general revenue money, do we have proof? Yes, that.
Yes, I sent you the exact language in the budget and the amendment that
Oh, good.
said, yes.
Okay, so if that comes up, okay. And then we also talked about how to get that information to wherever it ought to go. And so we can talk more about that, but.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if we have to, we'll just talk to the secretary, because that was legislative intent.
Yeah, just to make sure. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, that's great. I concur with what Angie said, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It was a pretty good session, all things considered. And for me, it was great to be able to be back in the Capitol and actually talk to legislators in person. It still wasn't easy because particularly the House members, they weren't all in the Capitol, but the senators were and many of the House members. So it was not normal, but sort of more normal than the last 2 years.
Has it been 2 years or is it one?
I guess it's one session, but then the interim committees were all virtual.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Uh-huh.
All right. Well, are there any questions for Linda? I know it was a brief, really quick update, but this session is recorded as mentioned earlier.